if we're completely honest, the idea is to fool spam filters into
Best way
thinking
to
that,
look at it. I kind of say it's like you retrain Google and Microsoft's algorithms to like your mailbox, basically.
as a marketer, I always think like, hey, I need to make sign up and registration as easy as possible. But you guys are like, no. You need a meeting with us first. We need to vet you. So why did you decide to do this? Hi guys, Artem here with another podcast episode. Today I'm talking to Mike, and I'm really glad that Mike is here because we actually met each other during a project I was doing for a client. I met Mike, we had a meeting, and after this meeting, I was like, I want to talk to him more. Like that was the whole idea for this podcast. I talked to Mike, related to one of the projects, and I thought I need to talk to him, and I thought podcast would be a good excuse. So here we have Mike. Thank you very much for doing this. And Mike works with email infrastructure, a very, very technical person, had a lot of insights and during the call that we had. So I thought that a lot of people would benefit from the knowledge that you have. So welcome, Mike.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Thanks for the great introduction.
Yeah, so could you tell us a little bit about yourself and about the company that you work for Mailreef?
Sure. Yeah. So to kind of give a background, so I've been a bootstrapped entrepreneur for the last almost 10 years now. Started out really just in like the virtual assistant space, kind of just doing oddball tasks for different companies. And then I would say almost about 8 years ago, we actually ended up creating a lead generation agency. So all we were doing was sending cold emails, booking meetings, and really just reselling those meetings back to the client. And so sometimes they were retainers, sometimes they were like pay per lead or pay per meeting. And so we really learned a ton just about cold email, but it was kind of like really learning on the fly. So, different clients needed different leads, and that required different templating and stuff like that. And so basically, while we were building this agency, we spent a ton of money on warming up mailboxes. Basically, there was like one other company in the world that was doing this. Our bill was like $10,000 a month just warming up mailboxes. And we were like, this is absolutely crazy. Why are we spending so much money on this? And so literally in 4 days, we created this company called Warm Up Inbox. It basically was built over a weekend. And we had so many clients on the agency side that we basically had enough mailboxes to kind of create our own seed list. And really, we undercut the market by 10 times. So kind of that $10,000 a month bill for us internally, brought it down to only a couple $100 a month. And so we decided to put a paywall on that and basically build Warm Up Inbox. And so we are the first email warm-up company in the United States. And then from there, it ended up being the largest warm-up network in the world by far. I mean, we were about 10 to 20 times bigger than any other warm-up pool in the world. This was before the Smart Lead and the Instant Leads of the world. Still to this day, it's basically the third biggest warm-up network in the world. We ended up selling it to private equity almost 3 years ago. It was bought out by the team behind Email List Verify, so they've been in the email validation space for a while, and so they're still growing that company, and Warm Up Inbox is still one of the essentially purest warm-up networks in the world, which is great. And so we learned a ton at Warm Up Inbox. Basically, we had tens of thousands, almost hundreds of thousands of mailboxes connected. They were almost all Google and Microsoft, and so we were seeing disconnections every day. We were seeing every kind of bounce, error, or blocking that you've ever seen in your life. And essentially, we were learning on the fly. We were Googling, trying to figure out what was happening. And then basically that kind of led us down this rabbit hole of going, oh my gosh, like we're building a pretty large company at Warm Up Inbox, but it's solely reliant on Google and Microsoft. And so we kind of just sat there and said, wow, like what happens if Google or Microsoft just shuts us down one day? Or they just decide that it wasn't even necessarily our system. It was more, hey, if they're going to shut down cold email one day. And that kind of led us down this rabbit hole of saying, hey, could we build our own email infrastructure that's just not Google, not Microsoft, and could it actually deliver somewhat closely to like a Google or Microsoft? And so we actually had some really good use cases within our own warm-up network pool we were seeing some extremely sophisticated companies, basically companies worth multi-billion dollars now, building their own email infrastructures. And we said, hey, we think we can build something very similar to that. And so 3.5 years ago, we literally created this company called, at the time, it was actually called Dino. We started building a network, scaling that out. It started to get a little popular, and a couple of years ago, it basically just imploded. We were like, oh, wow, like this system can't work. It doesn't work. And so we said, hey, well, there's so much demand. Let's rebuild it. And so we rebuilt it into Mailreef. And so we've been stable for about 2.5 years. We're literally sending over 100 million cold emails a month from our infrastructure now. And so, the cold email infrastructure space is still the wild, wild west, but I like to lean into that story a bit just because there's a lot to it. And there's kind of a lot of unknowns in the industry. I'm sure we'll kind of drill into it a bit, but even on our side, we're still learning, but luckily now we have enough kind of use cases and enough data points to actually like fully drill into kind of what's going on between Google and Microsoft receiving mailboxes and everything like that.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
So by the way, the first thing that I noticed when I visited your website is that you don't allow people to just sign up and pay and get started, which was really weird because as a marketer, I always think like, hey, I need to make sign up and registration as easy as possible. But you guys are like, no, you need a meeting with us first. We need to vet you. So why did you decide to do this?
Yeah, definitely. So one, we really wanted to just control the process. It was actually like learning. So the best way that we look at like our onboarding calls is one, we want to learn more about you. So and that kind of gives us a sense of saying, okay, like, can we help you? Yes or no? So like a great example is sometimes people come in and they say, hey, we have this like extremely great targeted list. We bought it from like an extremely reputable provider. Everything's validated, but they're all at Gmail and all at Yahoo and MSN. And so like a great example is like, we actually don't allow for emailing to personal email addresses because one, it really does kind of borderline around like the canned spam and everything like that, where it's not like business to business. It's not as hyper relevant as like you would think in a business setting. So those are kind of ways for us to kind of weed out just random use cases, although we could probably still help in some form. We kind of push it off that way, but it allows us to kind of control the ecosystem. And so for us, we own our entire infrastructures. So, we have bare metal servers, we buy our own subnets, but we also work with partner companies where you essentially couldn't like build it yourself, where we literally will like almost persuade cloud companies where they don't allow for email. And we say, hey, here is our very specific process on how we do this. Please give us your IPs. We know that they're actually going to deliver quite well. And here's like our expertise, right? We've been in the cold email space 10 years. If people go above certain bounce thresholds, we're monitoring that, trying to tweak. And so we're honestly really only trying to work with like the best cold emailers in the world. Of course, there's random people who are going to be better than others. And so over time, we've kind of widened that pool a bit. And so, like basically what we're really trying to do is put more bumpers in place. So we have somewhat of specific ways to use our servers. Great example is just like, hey, don't send more than X number of emails per month. It's just kind of one of those things where we kind of tailor that based off of your industry and things like that. So never say never. We are thinking about opening it up to the greater masses over time, but for us, we really value the relationships with our IP providers because ultimately we are not a churn and burn through systems. Like when we give you a server, it's essentially for the long term. We have some clients that have been on servers for 2.5, 3 years, and everything looks great. And so that's what we work with the cloud providers. We say, hey, you give us an IP address, like it's ours forever, even though in theory we're renting it from you. And so we have balances though. We buy our own IPs as well. So that's kind of when we start to, we're starting to build more of our infrastructure, but early on we wanted diversification just to do some more learning on that front too.
Okay, very good, very good. Makes sense. But let's get back to cold emails. And you mentioned the warm up, and many people don't know what probably warm up is and why do you have to do it. And I think the main theme for today's conversation could be, is cold email dead, basically, right?
Sure.
Second, if it's not dead, how do you do it properly? And some of the best practices and common mistakes. I think this would be the most valuable for everybody listening, to me as well.
Sure.
You mentioned warm up. So if you think about it, let's just talk maybe about the basics. So everybody and their grandmother is saying that cold email is dead, more or less, right?
Sure.
There are sophisticated systems in place in Gmail and in Google Workspace and Microsoft and so forth that detect more or less cold emails and they block them, right?
Right.
Is that true? Or
Yeah, I think like definitely a lot of engagement. Like farming at the moment is saying kind of in the first line of a LinkedIn post or on Twitter saying, hey, cold email's dead, comma, except you got to do this like long list of things. And so, yeah, one thing that we've been noticing just like in the industry as a whole are there are kind of a lot of like blanket statements and then you actually kind of like lift under the hood and you're like, okay, well, you know, where is this data coming from, right? Somebody might say, hey, warm up is dead, but you know, you actually look at their campaign metrics and it's like they sent 1,000 emails and they actually don't even know what caused it to be dead. And so you go, okay, well, let's talk about it more. And so, you know, Smart Leads becoming, you know, probably one of the biggest like cold email senders in the world. You know, I sat down with V and we kind of talked about it and we're like, well, yeah, if like, for example, warm up specifically was dead, you wouldn't hear kind of rumblings. You would hear, oh my God, everything's imploded. And so, you know, we as cold emailers, I think we like to think that like we're kind of the center of the universe, but you know, in reality, we're probably 0.0001 of all outbound volume in the world. And so, yes, it's funny because a lot of people think that Google and Microsoft are going to proactively block kind of the warming networks, but it's actually the opposite. You actually want to be worried about blacklist specifically pinpointing these warm up networks, and that's actually what's going to bring down warming, if anything. But in turn, I mean, really the way warm up works is, you know, you're basically getting volume out off your email to the world, and that volume out is just not being marked as spam. And so really like when blacklists and email service providers look at, hey, to determine if email is going to go in the inbox or the spam box, they're really looking at ratios. I mean, it's wild. If you actually peel back the curtains on these blacklist provider and actually look at some of the raw data behind the blacklist, it's amazing. Like they have your number immediately. Like they know exactly what's going on. So, you know, you start sending on day one and, you know, you just only send 20, 30 emails in a single day. That blacklist has your email and knows what's going out and knows what's being marked as spam. And so it isn't as much of a black box as most of the world thinks. But yeah, I mean, as a whole, like, for example, Mailreef does not work without warming. You know, we tell our clients to use any kind of warm-up pool that you want. Typically, you want to work with the biggest warm-up pools in the world. You know, that's actually why Warm-Up Inbox is one of the best ones, because basically they have such a large number of Google and Microsoft mailboxes. Same thing with like Smart Lead and Instantly. We really actually only suggest our clients mainly using those three as a whole, just because it's so large. And so, yeah, we've seen, you know, zero, like the 100 million cold emails we send a month, like we tell people to pair it with warming emails. You know, we would see an overnight implosion, you know, if warm up was dead. If anything, we think warming is stronger than ever. So yeah, it's just kind of funny because like there's no somebody, like I saw a comment the other day, they were like, I think it's the warming pools that are causing these like issues for Google. And you're like, okay, like, you know, why? Like, how are you looking at like domain data, server data, mailbox data? You can never really know.
Yeah. So if, you know, going back to the basics, so cold email, as I see it, is that if you're trying to just spam everybody, just do mass emails, send the same email to, you know, 4 million people hoping for the best, right?
Right.
That is dead, obviously, right? In my opinion, especially if you are just targeting normal individuals
Totally.
at gmail.com, at, you know, live.com and so forth. So that is not effective and hasn't been effective for a very long time, right?
Yeah, exactly. I would say, you know, maybe like 2018, 2019 or earlier, you know, we call them like the glory days essentially, where, basically Google mailboxes, you can send 500 to 1,000, emails out per day and not get blocked. And so I think people are kind of saying cold email is dead just because, if you almost look at a graph of like volume that you can get off on a Google or Microsoft mailbox, it was 1,000, then 500, then 200, then 150, then 100 to 50 to 20. And like now people are literally saying only send 5 cold emails a day from a Google or Microsoft mailbox. And at that point you go, wow, like this is kind of getting so crazy. And honestly, it's really just around like AI is getting a little bit better, and basically Google and Microsoft's pointing those AI systems to retrain these spam algorithms even better. So, what a lot of people don't realize is ultimately like part of the reason why Google and Microsoft mailboxes get blocked is the AI is getting better at just random system checks and going, hey, well, why did you email 5 people at the same company, and only sent 20 emails that day and didn't do anything else? And so they'll just kind of proactively kind of slap you on the wrist. And so that's why like, Mailreef's growing so quickly, is people are just kind of really getting tired of the Google and Microsoft mailboxes. But email's been around for an extremely long time. And so some of these core fundamentals are still there. For sending cold email. You just kind of have to pivot. But ultimately, if you have a good product, a good website, which a lot of people don't talk about, and it's actually targeting the right people, cold email works extremely well. I mean, we literally see campaigns still that are between 2 and 6% positive reply rates. And then if you can even get more hyper targeted, it's even better. So really, like the biggest update we've seen in the last year is really using like clay.com. Clay.com really started out as this pretty broad tool to kind of filter down data. And then I think a lot of people kind of looked at Clay and said, wow, we can use this for our outbound campaigns. And I think the voice was so strong to Clay that they literally pivoted to just outbound email engines. And so a lot of those kind of tactics I talked about of like finding the right person and having a good like value prop and kind of personalizing the email just even super slightly, Clay's kind of doing that all in one. And so a lot of people are kind of saying, hey, Clay is great for kind of personalizing one-liners and stuff like that. And that is true. But honestly, like we look at Clay these days as basically a deliverability tool. It just makes deliverability that much better. So that's kind of one of those things where over the last couple of months, we've just seen like if you kind of do the first name, company name, maybe a location, and kind of only change up 3 or 4 variables in an email, that template gets blocked in a couple of weeks. So you'll see open rates 50, 60%, and then they kind of just slowly go down to like 8%, 5%, and people are like, okay, it's my mailbox. And then they what they don't realize is it's actually they're getting better at fingerprinting templates just because AI is getting better. It's just improving the system.
So in my opinion, cold email is pretty good for B2B, right? And for highly targeted lists. And, just with everything else, if you do a good job, you have a good list, you have good value proposition, you have, good website, yada, 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 you can get some really good results. But in order to get started with cold emails and, email outreach, you mentioned Clay, and we will come back to it soon because I think it's an incredible tool, right? You can basically upload a list of contacts and then you can enrich it, and then you can use built-in AI to create basically personalized emails where every single email will be unique and it will not follow a specific template, which usually means that you will probably not be blocked or you will not be flagged as a mass emailer and so forth. But if I want to get started with cold email, can't I just put in BCC field in Gmail 1,000 emails and just hit send? Why do I need to invest into this infrastructure? And obviously you provide that infrastructure, right? Then you have been doing this for quite some time. Why traditional tools are not good? Why do I need to go for Smart Lead, Mailreef, and so forth? What's the benefit?
Yeah, so I mean the best way to kind of back into it is really you want to mimic. If you were to say find one person, say it was like a wannabe mentor of yours or something like that, where you're like, man, like if I can get a reply from this person, that would be amazing. And so, it isn't like you're going to BCC that single person, or you're going to really like spend the time. You're going to like make sure the email's formatted perfectly. If you put a link in an email, you're going to make sure that link actually opens, so you kind of don't look like a fool to that like potential like mentor that you want to reach out to. And so that's a one-to-one email. And so, especially using Google and Microsoft and even Mailreef, like you want that email to look as real as possible. And it's obviously to the prospect, right? The prospect feels like you actually hand wrote that email. But really, like from a deliverability standpoint, that's generally like everything I kind of talk about. You like Google and Microsoft Google and Microsoft mailboxes, that's basically what's receiving 80-90% of all global email, right? So kind of when I talk about that, all we're really trying to focus on is, hey, if we send an email, can we improve for Google and Microsoft and get it in the mailbox? And so what we've noticed is Google and Microsoft is, hey, when you send an email, like you got to make sure you at least have the person's first name. I mean, even like silly things that you got to think about is like, if you were to search that person's inbox, would the word human resources be in that person's inbox? Because, your email better be relevant to that person's industry, right? So, for example, I obsess over email deliverability. If somebody sent me an email about, human resources, like it's just not a match, and it's very likely going to go in the spam system. And so kind of having that one-on-one personalization is really good for deliverability, and it's really just what gets a good positive reply from the prospect. And so, nowadays, really, part of kind of this algorithm is more Google and Microsoft are looking at how many emails have kind of come off the mailbox as a whole that day, and how many times has that been marked as spam. But kind of the idea is that if somebody replies back positively to your email and you actually engage in a conversation, it might not kind of wipe the slate clean back to zero, but that positive engagement actually helps quite a bit. So, if a lot of people are replying back negatively or extremely negatively, almost with like really harsh sentiment back, that basically starts to alert Google and Microsoft and saying, okay, one, we're definitely going to start putting it to the spam box, but two, like you're on the edge of us just totally blocking your mailbox. So, I mean, a lot of kind of cold email, when you really sit down and think about it, it is like a lot of common sense. So one, you just have to really like make sure your ratios are correct. So, I mean, like honestly, we have some clients that send 2 times more than our allotted volume. And it's just because they have such a good value prop. Their website's extremely professional, and they are so hyper targeted on the right people at the right time. And so, we have some people that, send a lot lower volume, and it's because they're just like, they're not personalizing. They're kind of sending like, they're almost like super lazy and just kind of, might change up like the city name in an email, but kind of keeping it super broad is just not great for deliverability over time. So it's more of like a sustainability thing too, to kind of personalize. But that's why like a smart lead and instantly are great, because they kind of allow you to upload a list, kind of put those variables into an email and kind of parse it out. But they're even getting like smarter now and almost looking at kind of deliverability as a whole and saying, hey, like, based off the data that we're getting, you might actually want to kind of slow down volume or even pause this specific mailbox because, this mailbox or domain got flagged versus like, hey, let's put some more volume on your other mailboxes, just to kind of try to give you the best chance of getting a positive reply. But at this point, cold email is definitely a numbers game. People always ask me, what is a good positive reply rate or open rate? And the range is all over the place, but in general, it is trending down just as a whole because the spam filters are getting better. And also cold email is just becoming more blatantly obvious, right? So 8 years ago, people might have actually felt like a standard blanket cold email was actually personalized to them. And people are just almost like immune to it now. And so that's kind of part of it, is the B2B world somewhat used to it. But if your product's good enough and the value prop is actually hitting the right like note, I mean, all those kind of rules go out the window because, people want what you're selling basically.
Yeah, that's why some people still fall for, Nigerian prince and so forth.
Yeah, exactly.
Because they want to believe that somebody is, giving out free money.
Yeah,
So
and that also kind of brings up another interesting point around like industries, right? So there are just some industries that have basically been trained to go to spam. So for example, IT services or SEO services, right? Prince of Nigeria, like basically certain words like that. Like everybody kind of talks about, hey, don't use like spam, like bad words in your email, kind of like money or profit or ROI or dollar sign. Those are some of the basic ones, but sometimes just like straight up industries just don't work well. And the reason being is basically there's been so much volume in the world for that specific industry, and it's extremely good at doing it. So it's kind of the same thing about, categorizing images or things like that. It's just gotten massively like worse for those types of industries. But if you're kind of in this kind of blue ocean industry where it's kind of new, for example, like email infrastructure, like we were the first cold email infrastructure company to exist for a couple of years. When we send cold emails that say cold email infrastructure, spam filters have no idea what it is because there's only so many emails going out and they're mostly from us, for example.
Yeah. All right. So going back to basics, if I want to do cold email and, I get a list of people I want to contact, and for those, there are many different services, right? I could manually get, contact information off the internet, right? I could utilize services like Apollo and some others, right? LinkedIn, maybe, Sales Navigator. And I could utilize also, there are companies that specialize in mining data, like contact data and stuff like that, right? And as long as I play by the certain rules, depending on the country, then everything is honky-dory. So I have the list. If we talk about best practices, probably I would upload that list to clay.com, right? And I would start enriching that list with additional data. So clay.com has a lot of integrations with, tools like SEMrush and scrapers and so forth. So I could add additional columns such as, maybe their latest, LinkedIn post or the content of their website or something like that. So I enrich it to the point that I'm, happy. I have basically for every single contact, I have additional information that I can then feed into something like ChatGPT that clay.com provides as well and create a personalized email, right?
Yep.
I probably in the beginning want to keep it very short. So if I create an email sequence, the first email could be that it doesn't contain any links and it's like straight to the point, addresses the, pain point, and then, tells how we can help solve it, for example, and then solicits a reply, right? Because you don't want to tell them like, hey, here's my Calendly link, book a meeting or something. You just basically want them to reply and say like, hey, tell me more, right? And then maybe you have, in that sequence, you have a second email, but beyond that, it's kind of lost game already. Third, fourth, I've seen some people have, like 20 emails in their sequence, and it just doesn't work. It's just, it doesn't make any sense. So I use a tool, something like SmartLead, and from Clay, I can then bring it over to SmartLead, right?
Exactly.
But I probably wouldn't want to use my own email address because I don't want to risk it. So I will probably create auxiliary domains, right?
Yep.
And then I would bring those domains to you, to Mailreef. I can either purchase them from you or purchase them myself and then bring it to Mailreef. And then I set them up so that basically I put those email domains on your infrastructure so that they physically point to your servers and so forth. And then I create mailboxes. I could create mailbox under my own name, right? If I want to use that to reach out to people. But before I send any email through SmartLead using those email boxes, I need to do the warm-up that you mentioned already multiple times. And basically that warm-up is a process to kind of, if we're completely honest, the idea is to fool spam filters into
best
thinking
way to
that,
look at it. I kind of say it's like you retrain Google and Microsoft's algorithms to like your mailbox, basically.
Yeah. So basically, it's, dressing really well before your date and, trying
exactly. Putting your best foot forward, right?
Yeah. Kind of. Yeah. So basically warm up is, and I think SmartLead has unlimited warm ups or something like that. I think it's really cost effective. And there are other providers, as you mentioned. And basically you connect your email box and they start to simulate normal email traffic. So basically, they send out emails, receive replies, and stuff like that, right? So basically, they create this fake traffic that looks so realistic that email providers such as Google and Microsoft, they'll be like, oh, that's just, another email, another
Yep.
mailbox. And then at some point when you have done your warm up, and I think like 14 to 30 days is kind of like best practice.
Yep.
Yeah. Then you start your campaign, and you probably start your campaign with, you don't push high volumes right away. You start slow, and maybe you start to reach, once you start reaching maybe, one reply per 300 emails to, or whatever. Once you see some traction, then you keep optimizing and increasing volume, right? And you keep looking
Exactly.
at deliverability. If you see any issues, you kind of, slow down and then kind of regroup, make changes, and try again. But the point is always to get a reply. And then in Smart Lead, I think there is unified mailbox, so you can see all of the replies, and then you kind of, put
Yeah,
your
that's a cold
salespeople
email
to it.
101 course right there.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
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 I just wanted to bring it up because I know, of course, you know way more, and you're at very like high level when it comes to especially technical details. But some people don't know how cold email works, right?
For sure.
Some people might be watching this video and thinking like, "What the hell is warm up?
Well,
Like, what are these guys
there's a
talking
lot
about?"
to it. There's a lot to it. And like part of the reason, kind of going back to your question of like, hey, when we don't let like people in, well, we actually try not to let kind of beginners into our system, only just because like we're really designed for people who kind of have those initial templates or initial systems where they've kind of actually experimented on Google or Microsoft and said, hey, okay, like I'm getting some replies here. How do I recreate this? And so yes, you can go back and create a bunch of Google and Microsoft mailboxes just like you did in the very beginning. But that's kind of where we come in. It's like in a few clicks, we can create hundreds, thousands of mailboxes if you need. And that's actually where you can get the volume out. But yeah, kind of going back to basics when people are like, hey, how do I get started? I mean, you could literally, yes, you mentioned like clay.com is an extremely good tool. I would say that's almost like cold email 102. I mean, even on the 101 side, especially because like when you get into clay.com, like I'm a somewhat, I consider myself like an intermediate engineer. I'm great at cold email deliverability, but from a code perspective, I'm not the best. But when you like, I go into Clay, I look at it and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's a little bit more overwhelming. So there are instances where you can start with just 100 mailboxes or 100 emails as a whole. And yes, not doing all the personalization of Clay that I kind of talked about, but yeah, just doing first name, company name, maybe doing location. And if it's only 100, maybe you can even hand type out just a couple of like personal notes to each one of those 100. There's actually virtual assistants like on Upwork that can even help with that. It's essentially called like one-liners to kind of help with. There's even some tools out there. But in short, you can kind of even like dumb it down and say, all right, get one Google mailbox, get a Smart Lead account, do exactly what you described, and just send 100 emails and just look and see like, did anybody reply? There's, ideas around bounces. Like if your cold email is bad enough, even if it's a valid email, bounces still come back. So you can kind of take stepping stones where it's like, we see it all the time. People come in and they're like, Mike, I want to send 1 million cold emails a month. My market is huge. What do I do? And I say, okay, well, how many mailboxes do you currently have? And they're like 1 or 2. And it's just like, it's not, depending on kind of how that like campaign goes, yes, you can kind of scale up to that volume, but you really need to start super small with, maybe a couple of hundred. And then once you get a good benchmark on a couple of hundred, move that system into Clay with maybe 10 or 20 mailboxes, kind of get a little bit more volume out, see if anything breaks pretty quickly. And then you can maybe upgrade to like a Mailreef where it's like, hey, in a couple of clicks, like we can really kind of scale this out. But the cool part is you already have templates and models that already work. So we always say, whatever works well in Google or Microsoft, whether it's like, there's all these tactics out there of, do 5 mailboxes for one domain, or are you supposed to do 1 mailbox per one domain? Kind of the idea is that a lot of that doesn't necessarily matter. It's all around kind of who you're emailing in the copy and are those being marked as spam. And so if you have something that works extremely well on one side, you can basically pipe it right into Mailreef, and it's actually, if anything, it's going to work better. I mean, this is almost in October 2024. There's actually a really big public LinkedIn case study right now with a guy named Taylor, where we're actually getting over 0.5% better reply rate than Google mailboxes. And so, so there are some nuances to, like, sometimes the mailboxes that you use aren't actually, like, it might not even be your fault. So there are a lot of little nuances, but the great part is just like if you start really small, at least get some benchmarking data, you can kind of go from there. But yeah, it's really a lot of tweaking and improving. And then kind of once something works well is when you can really like kind of put some gas on it. And that's kind of where we come in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that you purchase or you rent, I guess, IP addresses, right? And you hold them for a very long time. So what happens if you get a new client, right? And everything is great, but then at some point they burn the IP.
Sure.
Right. So that could happen, right? They send 14, million emails soliciting, whatever, or pitching, or trying to sell Viagra or whatever else, goes on every single blacklist. What happens then?
Sure. Yeah. So one that was kind of when we first started the company, we were pretty like terrified of that because we were like, hey, best way to look at us is we're a standalone infrastructure in the middle of the internet. Nobody knows who we are. We're not Google, we're not Microsoft. We have no reputation behind us. And if anything, it's yes, IP addresses are always like old, right? We either if we rent them or buy our own, they have history. If you go back to them, they'll be like from the early 2000s or whatever. So basically the way that we get it to work is we connect our servers to like the warm-up networks, like clients do it themselves and everything like that. They can pick whatever tool they want. And that's kind of what brings that standalone server into almost the realm of like, hey, this is recognized almost like a Google or Microsoft mailbox. And so, yes, blacklists can happen from time to time. We actually, we haven't been on a server level blacklist in a couple of years at this point. One thing that we have noticed is actually, basically the way the structure works is you have a server, domains connect to the server, and then you got mailboxes. So it's kind of this 3-level thing. One thing we've really noticed is domains just burn out, and that's basically what you see on Google and Microsoft as you normally would. Servers are actually extremely resilient. I mean, it really takes a lot to get on a server level blacklist. And so like we literally had a client, we give benchmark data and we say, hey, like just follow within these bumpers. We had a client send 1 million cold emails in 7 days without warm up. And we ultimately said, hey, you can't do this anymore. Like we were getting bounce backs and seeing that, but the server still didn't get on a blacklist. So it's a great example of that. But in turn, if that were to happen, say like either the server kind of loses its oomph and like you can kind of clearly see that no matter what domain you add to the server, the domains don't do well. We do have the ability to pivot, but kind of going back to the earlier point is like, we really, even if we're renting them, we're like basically claiming ownership on them. If that IP is like bad, like we want to know why. And so that's kind of part of the reason why we also still do calls is like, we get to know you for, maybe 15, 30 minutes. We at least have kind of a clear understanding of what you were trying to do in the beginning. And then we actually will review everything. We review the servers, where you get the domains, who's replying back, what's the positive, negative reply sentiment, all of that. We're basically doing an analysis and going, hey, do you deserve to get another server or not? And so we have only replaced like 5 servers in the last 2 years. It's extremely rare, but it can happen. And sometimes if you like, most of the time what we notice, it's actually industry related. So, if you do like a lot of SEO outreach or something like that, where basically, and especially to enterprise level. So like, it's a lot easier to deliver to small, medium-sized businesses than it is to email pharmaceutical companies or banks or something like that. And so that's kind of where we kind of really do analysis and say, hey, like, do we swap this out? And then part of the reason is we keep onto it. We hold it. We actually will use that server later for internal use after we repair it. So basically with our cloud providers, they give us IPs, but we actually in turn make them better. Like in some cases, we actually get burned IPs from providers, and we recover them over a year's time. And so we actually absorb a lot of those costs to get them to like basically get cloud providers to work with us in a unique way. And so we're looking at spam complaints and everything like that too. So there's a lot behind the scenes outside of just kind of clicking a button and saying, hey, here it is. But yeah, we have a really awesome team. So currently we're a team of 8. 5 people are actually on our infrastructure team. One of them actually built a 50 million mailbox network for a telecom company. So we have this kind of cool scalable system. But really what we've kind of achieved is this concept of like isolation. So if I give you one infrastructure and I give another client another infrastructure, and say you meet up and reverse engineer it and look through it, like nothing's the same. And so that's actually what allows us to kind of isolate and actually pinpoint issues if there ever are any. And then in turn, your reputation is your own. So, when you're emailing to a Google or Microsoft mailbox, it's not really the waters aren't muddy for your specific server is kind of the concept. And so that's ultimately like what we try our best to do, is just saying every little thing that we do is just like, can we help you get into the inbox? And then part of kind of those onboarding calls we do is actually like an email deliverability course, like a 101. So we have our first sales rep started about a month ago, and the training wasn't like, hey, here's how you close a person. The training was, hey, I want you to be a top 1% cold email deliverability expert, and everything else kind of goes from there. And so that's kind of how we approach it.
From perspective of bad things will happen, your server might encounter issues and so forth. It's how you deal with them, right? So you want to work with providers that will help you, that will support you, and so forth. So there are no perfect providers ever. Every single infrastructure is susceptible to issues and whatnot. It's such
that was one thing we noticed when we started Mailreef. So in the early days, it was just us. I mean, honestly, this cold email deliverability space is starting to be pretty popular, but we were literally by ourselves for like 2.5 years, just selling against Google and Microsoft. And in the early days, we were basically going, don't use Google or Microsoft, like only use us. And over time, what we've noticed is really the cold email industry is saying diversification's the best. And so we honestly work with like the biggest lead gen companies in the world. Some of them are listed on our website. The idea is that we're only typically a 50% or a 33% kind of cog in a bigger system. So when you get to the point of delivering, millions of cold emails a month, typically it's like Google and us, or Google, Microsoft and us. And even in some cases, depending on the other cold email infrastructure companies out there, I mean, we even see other like layers on that as well. And kind of the nice part is when you layer in multiple different providers on a campaign, if one mailbox kind of collapses, you kind of look at the other pool and say, okay, are they collapsing with it? And if so, if all the mailboxes are going down, it's actually saying that it's a copy or contact issue.
Yeah.
But, say if just Microsoft's struggling and all 3 other providers are doing great, you can say, hey, either that domain's dead, or the pool that I'm on within Microsoft isn't great. And so that's kind of something that to kind of like remember too, is just like domains burn. They kind of live its own natural life. So say you have the best infrastructure in the world, whether it's us or somebody else, you're really it's a domain could like last 3 weeks or 3 years, and it all depends on like the number of spam clicks you have. So we see it all the time. We give you a great server, you put 30 domains on a server, 5 are dead, and people write in, they're like, hey, this one client's doing horribly, but these other clients are doing awesome. Like, what's the issue? And we don't even have to look at anything, and we just say, hey, those domains are likely dead, or it's the client. And so there are ways of testing that and doing some deliverability checks and stuff like that. There's a great tool called like Mailreef. I think actually some of the cold email tools in the world are going to start to kind of incorporate this a little bit more around the idea of like domains burning. So basically your cold email infrastructure, it's this living, breathing thing that you always kind of have to work into. So the best experts in the world, on the first of the month or the first of the week, they're buying new domains, whether they need it or not, in case a bunch kind of die out. And so, as you're building, as you're building systems and budgets, you have to kind of like remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think when it comes to cold email, if you are trying to reach people in the US, it's a lot harder. But I noticed when you're trying to reach people in smaller countries like Finland, Estonia, countries, where I have clients, it's a lot easier. So,
Right.
Sometimes I've seen, reply rates of, 30%.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
And I think part of that has to do with people in the US are just so used to getting bombarded by cold email. I think that's part of it, right? Like even at my when we had the lead gen agency those years ago, we never really did a targeted Europe campaign because like cold email is very popular in the United States, and it's
Yeah.
definitely starting to become more popular around the world. But those niches are actually where we see a lot of like great success for like
Mm-hmm.
general agencies. So if you're just targeting, in your native language in a specific country, for a product that's actually like good and looks like, I always say that the website really needs to look good. Otherwise, like you could really have skewed metrics across the board. But that's where we're actually seeing some like really good success too, because again, it's hyper personalized and it's hyper focused. It's not like I'm just blanket emailing the world my product. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. It's just that it was so funny when we saw some really good results, for example, from Denmark, from
Right.
Sweden, and we never seen anything like that in US. Never.
Yeah.
So so I thought about it like, oh, maybe, maybe this is good. Maybe this is good. There, like because of the GDPR and
Yep.
stuff like that, I think there is a lot of additional barriers, right?
Yeah, you definitely have to be careful, and in that case, you really have to kind of consult. Especially anywhere in Europe, like it's always good to kind of just like double check with a lawyer. But ultimately, you really just want to be hyper focused and have an
Yeah.
extremely clear like opt out link, like and that's something that is extremely important. And like that landscape's always changing too. People get harsher, and that's something to always kind of be cautious about. And that's kind of why in the US it's a little bit more lax. You still need opt-out mechanisms. We always suggest an unsubscribe link, and really like holding true to that, because that's really what keeps this industry intact, is really like not spamming and actually being focused and actually reaching out to very specific people. And that's when we onboard people, that's ultimately what we're always looking for in monitoring too. And the great part is the feedback loop on that is actually a great system. So
Yeah.
if you're getting crazy bounce backs, or your mailboxes are getting burned in like 2 weeks or 3 weeks, like luckily these algorithms are great for kind of course correcting and saying, hey, like you really shouldn't be sending these emails. And so like, that's ultimately what we always look for too. But yeah, like in Europe, just kind of being hyper focused and not doing a lot of volume, and having good opt-out mechanisms that are really like stable and compliant is really important.
Yeah, and just, consulting maybe a lawyer, as you mentioned, or somebody who can tell
So
you.
yeah, this is not legal advice.
Yeah. Who can tell
Yeah,
you what you can do and what you cannot
of
do.
course.
But I thought about it like we have a small SaaS product that we're launching, and I thought about it like, how can I utilize, cold outreach in this case? And I thought I'm going to probably send handwritten emails from my own inbox to maybe like 10 to 20 people that I think would really benefit from our product. No smart lead, no nothing, just as if I would reach out to any person, right? And then see what resonates and then start building on top of that, and not just going in and starting with, like moderate volumes, but just kind of seeing that value prop. I think that's like what people forget many times, that
Right.
if it's not interesting, if you don't have the hook, no Mailreef or Google, nobody will save you.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, even in the early days of Mailreef, we literally just like went to LinkedIn and we just said, who's the most active people, and like let's just email them and like see if we can get any reply. That's actually something that's like really interesting, is a lot of people are focused on positive replies, which is obviously like the end goal. But
Of course.
like I actually say, when I'm consulting on like copy, I say you got to invoke some sort of reply, like, that is in some way not going to like return back like an extremely harsh negative reply. But like sometimes a negative reply is great, because if you can kind of get a negative open-ended reply where it like they kind of trail you out a bit, you can kind of come back and at least get like product feedback and things like that. And so, yeah, like we actually run the holding company, and we like Mailreef actually came out of like our lab. Like
Is it?
we had warm up inbox that kind of came out of a lab too. And so, yeah, we never try to like, I always hate saying it, but it's like we really do things that don't scale. And like, that's a great way of just kind of like handwrite your first 100 emails, see what comes back, because, one or two replies is going to really like kind of like light up, kind of some sort of motivation to kind of then tweak it into like a bigger sending pattern. But you always got to start small, because you don't really know what's going to resonate. So
Yeah, I completely agree. But if you think about it, what are the biggest mistakes? And we can, wrap up soon. But what are the biggest mistakes that you see? Because you see quite a lot of different clients, a lot of different agencies, so you don't have to, of course, share names and so forth. But those who are doing like super well, what are they doing that actually works? And those that are, failing and burning, like which mistakes do they make?
for sure. Yeah, I mean, the simplest thing I would say is actually clay.com. Like
Okay.
I can immediately tell the difference. It's clay.com and then their product, right?
Mhm.
If it's just kind of one, like, I guess it's a product and industry. So like, great example is like we work with like a lot of unlimited design companies, where it's just kind of design services, but you go to their website and it's just beautiful.
Mhm.
They absolutely crush it because their total addressable market's extremely large. They can kind of email anybody, and then like that's just something that's like super in demand. And then there's like, you go to the main website and there's an immediate, like, the value props right on the website where you go, wow, like I would love if my website could look like that. And so that's a great example. But yeah, like clay.com, the industry and targets, is like that's kind of the biggest thing. So like, if we were to ever start like a lead gen agency again, like, we would not do any kind of SEO outreach or anything in the IT space, or, anything where you're kind of like, oh man, I hate getting those emails. Whether it's like insurance or, those types of things where it's just kind of like, okay, your market is so broad where it's like any person in the world could use it. That might be too big, but a little bit focused, bigger TAM. But the clay.com, it almost forces you to
Mhm.
hyper personalize. That's kind of what I like about it. So I tell people kind of give it 7 days to kind of get up to speed on clay.com, because it is like, it's that powerful, but that complex. But we like literally never lose clients that use clay.com and us, because it's like, it filters down the audience and it hyper personalized. So, if you can kind of go into it with that lens, it really does help. But of course, it's kind of after you get a first like couple of positive replies just from like handwritten emails. You can kind of go do it a couple of different ways, but that's kind of how like I would approach it.
And those that are failing and doing really poorly, what mistakes do they make?
Yeah, they have bad data. They don't verify the data. Emailing catch-alls is kind of this in between where it's like, if you can kind of remove the catch-alls, like catch-all emails mean like there's a spam filter. So really
Mhm.
only validating the personal replies, not doing any kind of personalization, and actually doing a lot of these like stupid little gimmicks of like, sent from iPhone, like at the bottom of your email, and you're like, you clearly didn't send it from your iPhone. Why would you like do that? Or, putting kind of a confidentiality notice at the bottom of your email, pretending like you're a law firm or something like that, where you're like, okay, you're selling like, like just any kind of random service. It's like not like confidential. So really just like, not following like some of those basics. And so that's kind of, part of it. And kind of weird subject lines. It's like we've seen people just like put the subject line none or something like that, and you're like, okay, what are you actually saying? And so that's kind of an important one too.
Awesome. I think this was super helpful. I think I got quite a lot of info for myself, and hopefully you watching there enjoyed this as well. Mike, this has been a pleasure. And by the way, don't forget to check out mailreef.com. I'll be honest, it's a service that we purchased, and we're going to move some of our email campaigns over to mailreef.com in upcoming weeks. So I'll let you know, good or
Perfect.
bad. you
Yep.
know, but one thing that I noticed already, that when we saw a small issue in the interface, I wrote to Mike and he was like, I'm on it, and it was fixed pretty quickly. So I think you're small enough that you still care about your clients.
I run customer support. We have over 500 clients, but the nice part is our support, it's either kind of when you first get started where either you don't know where a button is or something doesn't work as expected. That's kind of where we come in on the setup, and then we tend to not hear from you for a very, very long time, if never. And it's only when you have deliverability issues, and that's where we come in and say, is it us? Is it your domains? Like, kind of what's going on? And that's actually like part of the reason why people still like to use us quite a bit versus like a Google or Microsoft, where they're kind of bringing more over, is like, if something's wrong, we're actually like our support team's actually like deliverability experts, not just a, hey, here's an FAQ, punch in an FAQ answer. It's actually like we're running deliverability tests on the back end. We're pulling up bounce logs. We're pulling up, like system charts and everything like that. So we're really looking at quite a bit. And so that's kind of why people like it, because the nice part is actually we can solve anything. So say something does not work on Mailreef, like we literally can get it to work. It's either we're helping tweak your messaging, or we're totally changing up the infrastructure. Again, that's pretty rare, but or we'll kind of give you some guidance, right? Great examples, like people are like, hey, getting a lot of bounces, and we just like look at the bounce logs and we say, hey, like you're emailing a bunch of catch-alls, like catch-alls basically equal a lot of bounces. And so there are one or two minor tweaks that you can do to really like drastically improve things, especially if you are trying to reach like a perfect system. And it's kind of never going to be perfect, but we can always kind of edge you closer to that end goal. And that's kind of where we come in. So yeah, but thank you so much for having me. This has been great.
Thank you. This has been wonderful. I'm really happy that you had the time. Thank you so much. Remember to check out mailreef.com, and I'll see you in the next episode. Thank you, Mike.
Thanks, guys.